This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. We open with some breaking news. 3 people were injured and 5 people are in custody after a shooting in Philadelphia. Local law enforcement said the shooting erupted around 2:30 p.m. in Parkside. Around 1,000 people were gathered in a park to celebrate Eid al-Fitr, which marks the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Police said they believe 2 groups of people exchanged fire and fired some 30 shots. Police stopped some of the suspects and recovered their weapons. 2 people are in the hospital with gunshot wounds and no one was killed. Hosting Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida for a state visit, President Biden announced a ramped-up level of defense and intelligence cooperation with a key Indo-Pacific ally. The historic upgrade of the alliance aims to send a message to Communist China. NTD's Iris Tao brings us this report.
Following an elaborate arrival ceremony and a meeting at the Oval Office,
our alliance has never been stronger in our entire history.
And President Biden announced his actions to bolster U.S.-Japan military ties, speaking at a joint press conference with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida.
I'm also pleased to announce that for the first time, Japan and the United States and Australia will create a network system of air, missile, and defense architecture. We're also looking forward to standing up a trilateral military exercise with Japan and the United Kingdom.
And Biden also says that AUKUS, a security pact among Australia, the UK, and the US, is exploring ways for Japan to join. The closer ties come amid growing aggression from Communist China, especially in the Pacific. Here's Biden praising Japan for standing with the US in that region.
Standing strong with the United States as we stand up for freedom of navigation, including in the South China Sea, and as we maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits.
On Thursday, Biden and Kishida will be joined by the Philippines leader for the first trilateral summit among the 3 countries. The Biden administration says it's seeking to flip the script and counter China's efforts to isolate U.S. allies like the Philippines and Japan. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Most Americans are worried about illegal immigration. That's what more and more polls are now finding leading up to this year's election. President Biden now says he might take executive action to tackle the issue. NTD's Ariane Pazdar has the details.
Over 7 million people entered the U.S. illegally under President Biden. That's more than the population of 36 individual states. Now the president tells Spanish-speaking TV station Univision that he might take executive action. Take a look.
There's no guarantee that I have that power all by myself without legislation. And some have suggested I should just go ahead and try it. And if I get shut down by the court, I get shut down by the court. But we're trying to work through that right now.
The exact details of Biden's potential executive order are not clear yet. But Axios reports that he plans to restrict the ability of immigrants to claim asylum. Now, it's not clear if this will apply to all immigrants and to what extent the restriction would affect them. The president reportedly plans to issue the order in April. And at the same time, House lawmakers on Wednesday investigated what they call Biden's border crisis.
And to say that this is a crisis is actually an understatement of what we are seeing. It is a catastrophe that we are going to suffer and struggle through for decades to come.
A new Rasmussen poll on Wednesday found that 64% of likely U.S. voters say it's accurate to describe the current immigration situation as an invasion. One reason people sometimes describe it as an invasion is the amount of deadly drugs coming into the United States.
The fentanyl crisis is not a partisan issue. One of my oldest friends died of a fentanyl overdose.
The Democratic ranking member added that the crisis shouldn't be used to play politics, but that solutions should be found. Ariane Pazdar, NTD News.
The House has voted against a rule to allow debate on a bill to reauthorize the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
Wednesday's rule vote was the 3rd attempt by the House of Representatives to renew the surveillance powers that expire on April 19th. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act allows the intelligence community to surveil communications of foreign nationals outside of the U.S., even if those communications are with U.S. citizens.
702 allows us to stay a step ahead of foreign actors located outside the United States who pose a threat to our national security.
Look, I think personally, I think there are real civil liberties concerns, and I think that Americans generally want to know that they have privacy rights. If there are some national security concerns, there should be a warrant process that is actually fair and done in a way that's responsible.
Speaker Mike Johnson has urged his Republican colleagues to vote in favor of the reauthorization of the FISA Act. The bill, as it currently stands, has 56 amendments that would further regulate intelligence gathering compared to the previous FISA reauthorization.
These reforms would actually kill the abuses that allowed President Trump's campaign to be spied on.
That FISA is needed. I understand. I believe that there are safeguards, and I trust the chairman of that committee that he put the safeguards in so that what happened to President Trump won't happen to any other American.
On a post on Truth Social, former President Donald Trump urged House Republicans to kill FISA. The former president has alleged that the Surveillance Act was used illegally to spy on his campaign. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican from Georgia, posted on X on Wednesday saying that, and I quote, "Johnson already fully funded the DOJ that wants a death sentence for Trump. Is he going to continue to give the deep state the tools to kill Trump?" Remember, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene submitted a motion to oust Speaker Johnson over 2 weeks ago. On Tuesday, she sent a letter to House Republicans urging them to support that motion. And on Wednesday, she reiterated her calls to House Republicans to oust Speaker Johnson.
But it's pretty clear and obvious and being whispered among the conference. Mike Johnson does not have the support of the conference.
Wednesday's vote marks the 6th time Speaker Johnson has lost a rule vote on the House floor. It is expected that the bill will be reintroduced under suspension of the rules this Friday. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
And former President Trump has filed another appeal in the New York hush money case, this time raising presidential immunity. NTD's Arlene Richards has the latest on the appeal, plus other Trump updates.
Good morning, guys. Any comment this morning?
As former President Trump's first criminal trial approaches, his attorneys file yet another appeal in the hush money case, this time arguing that the trial judge should have permitted them to raise the presidential immunity defense, and because the judge refuses to recuse himself. In a filing on Wednesday, Trump's lawyers argued that the judge exceeded his authority in those rulings. They asked for a hearing on May 6th. Arriving in Atlanta for a fundraiser, Trump comments on the Arizona abortion ban ruling.
Mr. President, did Arizona go too far? Did Arizona go too far?
Yeah, they did, and that'll be straightened out. And as you know, it's all about states' rights. That'll be straightened out. And I'm sure that the governor and everybody else are going to bring it back into reason, and that will be taken care of, I think, very quickly.
The Arizona Supreme Court ruled to uphold a Civil War-era law that bans nearly all abortions. Trump had announced on Monday that abortion should be left to the states. He also attended a fundraiser in Orlando. The two fundraisers are expected to raise $15 million. In other Trump-related updates, former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg is sentenced to a 5-month jail term as part of a plea agreement. He admitted to giving false testimony during a 2020 deposition at the New York Attorney General's office and to testifying falsely about the value of Trump's triplex apartment during the civil fraud trial. As part of the deal, he only pleaded guilty to the deposition testimony. In the classified documents case, Judge Eileen Cannon finally agrees to keep witness names secret. In a 24-page ruling on Tuesday, Cannon relented in letting the prosecution redact witness names in pretrial motions, but she rejected the prosecution's request to block witness statements. Back in Georgia, the Department of Justice revealed some discrepancies in District Attorney Fani Willis's use of federal grant funds. A DOJ spokesperson told the Washington Free Beacon there were inconsistencies in reporting from Willis's office about a $488,000 federal grant. This comes 2 years after Willis fired a whistleblower who called out a potential misuse of the grant. The Free Beacon reports that the DOJ disclosed the discrepancies after providing contradictory statements regarding awards Willis's office may have made under the grant. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
And this just in, a New York appeals court judge has rejected the Trump legal team's latest and third attempt to delay the hush money criminal trial. Associate Justice Ellen Geschmer rejected the request. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Joining me now to discuss the significance of the U.S.-Japan alliance, as well as the latest upgrades announced today, is William Chu. He is a Japan Chair Fellow at Hudson Institute. William Chu, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Glad to be here, Tiffany.
Now, this bilateral summit between President Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is the biggest upgrade to this alliance since the 1960 Mutual Defense Treaty. Now, how big of a deal is this for each side?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a huge advancement because what it does is actually it allows U.S. Forces in Japan to work more on an operational level closely with their Japanese counterparts. That's partly due to sort of the Japanese stepping up their defense buildup, as well as developing joint operation centers of their own. But it's also sort of a U.S. reflection that, hey, we can no longer, if there's a contingency, we're no longer going to operate separately from the Japanese, which is the traditional model. Instead, we're going to move our coordination hub to Tokyo instead of necessarily back in Hawaii. And so that if there's ever anything that emerges in Western Asia or in the Pacific, I think we are in a much better position to work closely with our Japanese allies.
On that note, you were actually at the welcoming ceremony at the White House today, where President Biden called this partnership, quote, unbreakable. What is your analysis of this alliance? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tiffany. I think the alliance is strong. It's by far our most important alliance, and it's a strong alliance, partly due to the commitments by leaders of both countries in the past several years. Where I think it's going is that it's increasingly going to take on a more comprehensive approach, right? So obviously, you know, the headlines will be the defense cooperation, joint production, potential joint production of weapon systems, but it's also in the economic side where there's a lot of cooperation on economic security. Japan is America's largest investor in terms of foreign investors coming into the United States, and obviously there's a lot of tech cooperation that also came out in the announcement today. There are certain areas where I think, frankly, the administration has sort of fallen short of its stated goals, where we work closely with the Japanese on economic security, but we don't always address their needs on trade. And I think that's an area where we can continue to do better. We just need to take a more holistic approach and continue to pursue those directions.
On the tech front, we are seeing that Kishida and Biden are enlisting Amazon, NVIDIA to fund AI research. How do you see AI fitting into this partnership?
Yeah, I think there's so I think AI, as well as other tech cooperations that they announced in terms of fusion energy and quantum computing, I think those are really like what sort of Japan sees as critical emerging technologies, right? And I think those are areas where Japan, from its latest action plan on economic security, has addressed as, critical emerging technologies are areas where we want to cooperate with our allies' development. And then with the technologies where we are taking a lead, we have to protect them. And so I think it's an area where there's a great scope for cooperation instead of leaving the regulations and standards to other countries that may pursue technological development without much regards to in terms of how it would be used.
Now, back on the defense side, we did see that for the first time, the U.S. will change its force structure in Japan to maximize joint operations. Now, Japan has been moving away from that pacifist phase and instead bolstering its defense amid rising aggressions from both China and North Korea in the region. Given that, many are now saying Japan is arguably the U.S.'s most important ally in the region. What does that signal in terms of the geopolitical climate there?
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, I just got back from a week-long trip in Japan back in March, and I had a lot of conversations. And I think the thing that I was struck most was that how much they were shaken by the invasion of Ukraine, right? Because previously there was this assumption that, any kind of military development or procurement would lead to militarism. And I think there's a new realism in Japan that, what happened in Ukraine can be this this unlawful, revisionist, aggressive action by a country towards another is very possible. It happened in Ukraine. It could happen in East Asia. You're certainly seeing China trying to do that in the South China Sea, and that Japan has to be more realistic about, taking responsibility for its security and contributing to the larger security output in East Asia, alongside with the United States, as well as potential future partners such as Australia, the Philippines, and South Korea.
Speaking of the Philippines, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida will actually remain in Washington for Thursday with a trilateral summit with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Now, with this first trilateral meeting between the three leaders, how do you view this?
I think this is a significant step. I know all three leaders will try to downplay it by talking about, the trilateral, the agreements will be mostly be in the area of economic cooperation and the technological development. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these, we have to take sort of strategy in East Asia and security in East Asia from a more comprehensive approach, taking account of military security as well as economic security, as well as other rule of law issues. And so I think this is a major step in affirming that the importance of the rule of law and basically complying with international standards and like fair trade issues and issues over territories in East Asia, in Southeast Asia, in the South China Sea, that all three countries and leaders have an interest in maintaining and reminding everyone that these principles should not just be violated just because one country doesn't like the current situation.
William Chu, thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thank you again.
The global information environment leveraged by a communist regime. A House panel today examines the Chinese Communist Party's malign influence at the United Nations. NTD's Sam Wong has the story.
From COVID origin to human rights abuses, the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Wednesday zoomed in on Communist China's malign influence in the United Nations.
Even though China's financial contributions to the UN remain comparatively small, the CCP has become adept at manipulating the UN system for its own advantage.
What was once a defensive, snapping turtle posture has been replaced with Xi Jinping's wolf warrior foreign policy.
At a House hearing on Wednesday, Congressman Chris Smith said China's human rights abuses often get swept under the rug due to the regime's coercive tactics at the United Nations, and the victims include Uyghurs, Christians, and Falun Gong practitioners.
The repression of religious freedom, the pervasive use of torture, and they are doing a full court press at the United Nations to cover it up, as they did with the Universal Periodic Review.
Another topic at this hearing, the origin of COVID-19. At the beginning of the pandemic, Beijing authorities silenced whistleblowers and left open both domestic and international travel. By the time the regime started to acknowledge the outbreak, cases had already begun to pop up around the world.
The WHO's communications and actions were influenced by political considerations rather than grounded in public health and the need for impartial dissemination of information.
In 2021, the World Health Organization said it was very unlikely that the COVID-19 virus came from a lab, but the agency later rebuked China for hiding data linked to the virus's origin. The WHO was accused of regurgitating Beijing's talking points, most notably one-sided sources from Chinese authorities, saying there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission.
There has been no other kind of recent infectious disease that has come out in the last several decades that over so many years we've been unable to trace.
I think it's pretty clear that it came out of a lab. I think it was a military operation.
Lawmakers said the U.S. must shore up relations with democratic allies to counter the CCP's repression, both at home and abroad. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wong, NTD News.
Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war, President Biden is calling for a ceasefire and more aid supplies in Gaza. And Senate Leader Chuck Schumer met with Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid in Washington yesterday. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has more updates.
President Biden, in an interview with Univision that aired Tuesday, called Israel's prime minister's actions a mistake. The president says he thinks it's outrageous that drone strikes killed 7 aid workers in Gaza last week.
So what I'm calling for is for the Israelis to just call for a ceasefire allow for the next 6-8 weeks total access to all food and medicine going into the country.
The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says over 33,000 people have been killed in 6 months of war. The ministry does not differentiate between combatants and civilians. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed to complete the elimination of the terrorist group Hamas.
Including in Rafah. No force in the world will stop us.
The White House said Tuesday an in-person meeting of Israeli and U.S. officials on a planned operation in Rafah will take place in a couple of weeks.
But again, those open line of communication, there's constant communications happening every day.
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said although there's been an increase of aid into Gaza over the last couple days, it's not good enough.
We would like to see more action following through on what the Prime Minister has announced publicly, and we'd like to see that over the course of the next few days.
Senate leader Chuck Schumer met with Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid in Washington after Lapid met with Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Monday. Lapid said a hostage ceasefire deal would be difficult but doable. Blinken says Israel has not informed the U.S. of any specific date for an offensive push into Rafah. He says the administration is convinced that major military operations in the city would be extremely dangerous for civilians caught in harm's way. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
The UK's National Health Service today released an independent review on gender transition procedures for minors. The CAS review submitted by British pediatrician Dr. Hilary Cass found that prescription of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to minors is unsupported by sound scientific evidence. Joining me now to discuss the significance of this review is Colin Wright, NTD News contributor and evolutionary biologist. Colin, thank you for joining us. Now, this is being called a landmark review. How significant is this review, and why has it taken so long to get something like this?
So it's absolutely a landmark review because it's not only a thorough review of all aspects of sex modification procedures for kids claiming gender distress from an independent and well-respected pediatrician like Hilary Cass, but it was published in concert with a handful of peer-reviewed systematic evidence reviews that looked at the evidence base that's used to currently justify these gender-affirming procedures. This is what took so long to happen because these systematic reviews don't happen overnight. Now, it's important to note that the systematic reviews, they represent the highest standard of evidence in evidence-based medicine because they survey the entire literature, all the studies that claim to be addressing any of the things like puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, etc. And all of these reviews that were published in concert really showed that the evidence base supporting any of these procedures is severely lacking and that they should not have been advised in the first place. Additionally, the CAS review found that puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, the evidence was completely unfounded. And also, they demonstrated that the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, or WPATH, was sort of involved in this citation ring with the Endocrine Society, where they manufactured this false perception of a medical consensus on these issues. In effect, it was just radical ideology rather than evidence-based medicine that was pushing these procedures forward in the medical community.
And now England actually stopped prescribing puberty blockers to minors following recommendations in Cass's earlier interim report. Now, what kind of impact do you expect this will have on the U.S. medical community?
That's tough to say. You know, it should come as a shock to the U.S. medical community because the results of this review run directly in the face of what literally every health organization has been unthinkingly parroting in the U.S. based on WPATH's ideological guidelines. The U.S. is even now more of a medical outlier on the global stage with respect to these sex modification procedures for kids. And it's getting harder and harder to ignore. The countries reining in or banning these procedures, they can't be considered conservative countries by any stretch of the imagination. These are some of the most progressive countries in the world. So right now, all eyes are on the U.S. to see if we embrace evidence-based medicine or we continue down this sort of ideological path of faith-based, radical, ideologically driven medicine.
Now, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling reacted to the report on X, or formerly Twitter. In part, she wrote, quote, "The CAS review may be a watershed moment, but it comes too late for detransitioners who've written me heartbreaking letters of regret. Today's not a triumph, it's the laying bare of a tragedy." How likely are we to see debate on this issue following this review? And what about the young people who have transitioned?
Well, the debate's going to rage on because there was never good evidence base to justify any of these procedures. They took the absence of evidence of harm as evidence of the absence of harm, but that's not how evidence-based medicine works. You don't just go gung-ho on a procedures and then wait till the evidence emerges. There are plenty of things we don't do. You don't jump out of an airplane and do randomized controlled trials on whether that's dangerous because it's just so obvious that it's dangerous and not medically necessary to do anything like this. Just as we know that giving kids puberty blockers followed by cross-sex hormones is sterilizing, we don't need to really know if these are if there's true benefits and if they're life-saving. Activists are now sort of starting to pivot and say that, well, because there were no randomized controlled trials, the Cass review needs to be jettisoned. But then they also say that randomized controlled trials on these types of questions is unethical because we can't withhold life-saving care to some kids who are experiencing gender distress. But we don't know that they're life-saving because there's no good evidence to support it. So we're just in a weird predicament where it's just ideologues on one side and then scientists and evidence on the other side. Right now, a lot of the kids who have already gone through these procedures who have been harmed, they're just in a predicament because they're having a hard time getting the care that they need to detransition as well. So this is sort of another realm that needs to be further explored, such as getting healthcare codes for these types of procedures, these reversal procedures in place, so we can undo a lot of the harm that's been done.
Colin Wright, NTD News contributor and evolutionary biologist, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Small business owners are criticizing current tax policies, telling lawmakers the tax code is too complicated and constantly changing. NTD's Virginia Gibson has more.
The tax codes, but there have been, they're just crazy.
Small business owners criticize current tax policies, telling lawmakers it needs to be more simple and stable.
Straightforward, predictable tax laws means I don't have to spend time locked away with my accountants trying to figure out the rules of the road. Instead, I can get out on the shop floor and focus on growing my business.
Small business owner Chuck Wetherington says Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act drove a wave of industrial expansion, but now tax increases are hurting his business.
My regulatory expenses have gone up over 460% in the last 8 years, and not done anything to make the products better or safer.
Owner Walter Rowan says politicians focus too much on what the tax rate is because tax rates currently aren't affecting many small businesses.
I, for one, since 2020, haven't made any money. So the tax rate that I'm paying right now doesn't mean a thing to me. And depreciating means a thing to me. Interest rates means things to me.
Rowan says he has to hire tax accountants because his taxes are so complicated. Many small businesses can't afford to.
Tax simplification is deregulation. Tax simplification is tax fairness. Fairness is about a level playing field where you don't have to hire teams of accountants and lawyers.
Economist Aaron Headland says simplifying the tax code is critical, especially during the current cost of living crisis.
The federal tax code currently sits at over 75,000 pages. This is about a 16-foot ceiling. The federal tax code and all the guidance that goes along with it would be twice the height of the ceiling.
Republican Mark Alford says Biden's proposed budget contains $4.9 trillion in new taxes. The Treasury Department says $2.7 trillion would come from businesses over 10 years. Alford believes Biden's budget would hurt small businesses. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. An update in the Israel-Hamas war. Israeli aircraft has killed 3 sons of a top Hamas political leader in the Gaza Strip. Hamas said 4 of the leader's grandchildren were also killed. Ismail Haniyeh's sons are among the highest profile figures to be killed in the war so far. The Israel Defense Forces confirmed the killings. The strikes comes while Israel is holding sensitive ceasefire negotiations with the Hamas terrorist group. With retail theft an ongoing problem nationwide, Florida and California lawmakers introduced new bills in hopes of solving the growing issue. NTD's Christina Corona has more on the story.
Governor Ron Desantis signed a bill Tuesday that will increase penalties for retail theft throughout Florida and seeks to prevent smash-and-grab robberies. HB 549 allows law enforcement to impose tougher punishments for retail theft and inciting looting through social media.
We are also going to make it a second-degree felony if you use social media to solicit others to participate in retail theft, because what you have are these flash mobs that are incited by social media to descend on some stores.
A third-degree felony, punishable up to 5 years in prison, will be issued if criminals commit retail theft with 5 or more individuals. HB 549 will also allow tougher punishments for porch piracy. DeSantis criticized laws in other states, such as California.
This retail theft, it's a total scam. You have liberal laws, and these people are exploiting that to basically further themselves, knowing that they can loot a certain amount without really facing any significant penalties.
However, in California, a bipartisan group of lawmakers announced 7 bills in a comprehensive package in hopes to strengthen public safety and protect shoppers and business owners across the state. Among them was AB 2943, the California Retail Theft Reduction Act, that would target serial retail thieves with the penalty of up to 3 years behind bars and provide rehab and diversion programs.
It targets those that engage in repeated specified conduct or who possess a quantity of goods inconsistent with personal use.
Other bills, such as AB 3209, would enable retailers to obtain a restraining order lasting up to 2 years after a conviction or multiple citations for theft offenses. And AB 1972 seeks to strengthen the California Highway Patrol's resources at railroads to combat cargo theft.
These 7 bills will sharpen California's ability to tackle organized crime head-on, to protect our communities, to keep our businesses safe.
These bills underwent review in the Public Safety Committee. They must proceed through additional committees before reaching the governor's desk. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Squatters are a growing concern across the U.S. Specifically, it's very hard for homeowners to get rid of them. Arizona lawmakers have a plan to help, and they've just sent it to the governor's desk.
Arizona Senate Bill 1129 would simplify the process for property owners to remove squatters from a home.
You go on vacation, your house is empty, you think, you've been gone for weeks, months, you come home, and there are squatters in your property.
But one of the biggest victims in this crime are military. Those who are deployed overseas, they're there for a year and a half, some up 2 years.
Representative Justin Heel said his understanding is the law aims to make it easier for police to determine whether a person is squatting or not. He said often the police refer the owner to the court system, which could take weeks.
Police will often get a call saying there's someone in my home. They show up at the home. They say, this is my home. This person doesn't belong here. They should go. The squatter who's in the house says, no, this is my house and I'm not leaving.
One speaker had concerns about potential abuse of the law that could be used against domestic violence victims.
This codifies that situation and also will not only render those women homeless, but also as criminals.
The issue of squatting has been gaining national attention recently. An illegal immigrant from Venezuela went viral on social media for giving instructions on how to squat in American homes. He was arrested by the feds on March 31st. 2 weeks ago in Florida, House Bill 621 was signed into law. The bill is similar to the one in Arizona, where it makes it easier for homeowners and police to immediately remove squatters. Arizona's bill is now waiting for the governor's signature before passing into law.
The Biden administration is setting new regulations on the amount of forever chemicals that can be found in drinking water. It's the first federal standard of its kind. This new standard will require water utilities to filter out 5 of the forever chemicals, also called PFAS, that are currently found in half of the drinking water in the U.S. PFAS have been linked to a number of health issues, including cancer, heart disease, and reproductive problems. The CDC says they are found in the bloodstreams of nearly 97% of Americans. They're often used to help products repel water and oil, but linger in the environment and the human body. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start with a big Olympics announcement. As the gold medal winners in track and field will receive prize money, what's the reason behind this?
Well, they didn't say, exactly specifically, but this is the World Athletics, which is the governing body for track and field. Their statement said they want to, quote, make sure some of the revenues generated by athletes at the Olympic Games are directly returned to those who make the Games the global spectacle that it is. Now, the Olympics have generated big money for quite a while, and it keeps growing. I mean, NBC has been paid more than $7.5 billion to televise the Games through 2032. I think the awareness we've seen from the NCAA, which has at least proposed anyway a plan for schools to pay their players, after years of not even letting them profit from their own name, image, and likeness, has really awakened others to do the same. And this money comes from the allotment that the IOC distributes to World Athletics. Now, at this point, this only applies to track and field at the Olympics and only the gold medal winners. There'll be a total of 48 of them, and they'll each receive a $50,000 cash prize. So I wouldn't be surprised to see other Olympic competitions follow suit before the games start this summer.
Shifting gears to the NBA, Commissioner Adam Silver said today that the gambling investigation into Toronto's Jonte Porter could result in a possible expulsion from the league. What was he referring to?
Yeah, these accusations reportedly involve prop bets that were placed on him in 2 separate games. Now, prop bets could be how many points or rebounds or whatever statistic on an individual player. But you can bet the under or the over on these, and even a parlay of several of them together, which are much riskier but pay much higher. Now, apparently in those 2 specific games, Porter played briefly before citing an injury or illness and leaving the game. That effectively ensured whoever bet the under would win. Now, apparently some sports books noted some odd or unusual betting patterns on those 2 games, and they alerted the NBA. Now, the league has business relationships with a number of these sports betting sites, so that's not really surprising. Now, Silver didn't exactly say what Porter's accused of, but he said there's nothing more serious in these charges against him. Now, one thing to note, Porter is not the normal multi-million-dollar NBA player. I mean, the average player makes $10 million a season, which is absolutely incredible. This year, he's making $400,000 on what's called a 2-way contract with the NBA and their G League affiliate. So anyway, this is a still developing story.
Well, looking at the action on the court, we're just 6 days away from the NBA's play-in tournament. Now, this has taken place for several years, but is still confusing to most fans. What's the reason behind that?
Well, this whole thing was really to increase the number of the teams in the playoffs so as to prevent teams from losing on purpose, or also known as tanking. The whole reason you lose on purpose, of course, is to get a higher draft pick in hopes of getting like the next LeBron James or something. But I think the league has been concerned that teams purposely lose if their team is only like a middle-of-the-road team that has little shot at winning the title, but isn't so bad that they'll be in last place. I mean, technically, 16 of the 30 teams make the playoffs, but realistically, not everyone has a chance. So the play-ins extend the number of teams that get in the playoffs to 20 by having the 7 through 10 seeds in each conference battle it out for the final 2 playoff spots. Previously, it was just the 7 and 8 seeds that just went to the teams with the 7th and 8th best record in each conference. It was very simple. I'm not sure that it actually prevents anyone from tanking, but it does make for a very interesting first week of the playoffs if it's not too confusing.
Elsewhere in basketball, the TV ratings for the men's championship game are in, and for the first time ever, the women outdrew the men. What's been the reaction to this?
I think it's subdued. I think everyone was kind of expecting this the way it was going. I mean, this has been a storyline this whole season with Iowa and really Caitlin Clark. It's pretty clear, of course, specifically like who people are tuning in to see. I mean, the semifinal game between Iowa, who has 2-time Player of the Year, Caitlin Clark, and UConn drew 14.5 million viewers. That was a record for a women's game at the time, and it was more than double the amount of viewers who tuned into the other Final Four semifinal Saturday between South Carolina and NC State. So each of Clark's last 3 games, which against LSU, UConn, and South Carolina, each set successively new records. And if you look back a couple of years, the women's championship game this year doubled the TV ratings for last year, and it was nearly 4 times what it was just 2 years ago. So if Clark isn't considered the greatest of all time, she is certainly the biggest draw of all time.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For around-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.